Sorry it's taking a little bit longer to get started, but it's a little bit more unique for the others because we have 5 speakers for various sorts. So to introduce you all, so we have, this is the order I have them on my phone. Matt McCune, who got his PhD in physics at Mizzou and is now a AAA fellow. Do you have your position assignment yet?
Yeah.
Which is?
Division of Electrical Communications Cyber Systems at NSA. Cool.
Yeah. Then we have Katie Steen. He's got the Masters of Public Affairs at also Mizzou and is now a policy associate with AAU. We have Katie Harris with a PhD in anthropology, also AAAS, who just found her assignment in the House Committee of Natural Resources or for Natural Resources. On. We have Eileen Oni, whose background is in molecular biology and her PhD in cellular or cell and developmental biology at Rutgers and is a AAAS fellow at NSF. And then Chanel Matney, who got her PhD at Hopkins in neuroscience and is currently a research associate at a science and technology think tank. So we have a wide range of backgrounds here, well, kind of wide to some degree. They're all doing different sorts of things and have different experience. We have several questions that we drafted, and you are more than welcome to have your own questions and to ask them. Try not to be antagonistic. So the first question that we go with is, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were a graduate or professional student? You all graduate students. So what do you wish you had known when you were in their shoes? And nobody's obligated to respond.
I can start. I would say you're already qualified here. If you're interested in being a AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellow, every single one of you is already qualified. The second you graduate with a PhD or a Master's in Engineering, and you're already involved in science policy work here in DC, you've already done more than the average person involved. So don't think, oh, well, they're not going to pick me, or I need to do years of work before I apply. No, you've already qualified.
I will add to that. The fellowship is designed to get scientists to understand science policy, and what they stress and what having a background is great, but also what's really attractive is the willingness to do policies that are outside of your immediate purview. So if you do, let's say, water policy, and you end up in an office that does broadening participation, that doesn't mean that that's not policy and that's not something that you would never want to do. So they do like, if you're applying, they do like your willingness to be flexible in what you want to do, because you can circle back, and the basics of learning policies and digesting information to inform your decisions is a skill set that you can take to any kind of policy. And so that's something that I would stress, and to broaden your experiences as much as possible, not to be narrow, because that can limit yourself, especially if you work, let's say, on the house, on the Hill. You would probably be working on, you would be the science person, so you would get all the science. And so, so don't limit yourself. So I would just add to that.
Expanding on that, along those lines, I wish I would have known the great diversity of career options there are in policy. We have several AAA fellows on the panel, and that tends to be the most visible of the pathways. It's also one of the more prestigious. You're all probably very qualified. It's incredibly competitive. And so I was a little intimidated thinking about applying to one of these, top 5, top 3 fellowships. Well, if I don't get it, that's it for me. I can't have a job in policy. So not true. The job that I have now, which I love, didn't even know it existed until I was really on the job hunt. So other types of science policy jobs you can do are in regulatory affairs, working with FDA and other regulatory agencies in government. Most academic institutions have their own legislative affairs office, sort of representing their science and that institution's interest on the Hill. You can do science writing, in science policy. You can work with a patient advocacy group. You can do legislative affairs on behalf of a hospital or other clinical type organizations. So there's a whole huge ecosystem of policy and advocacy outside of just Washington, D.C. that I wasn't very aware of as a student. And that just really broadened my horizons and made me realize, wow, now I can really find a specific, niche that would be well suited to my skill sets, my interests, where I want to
a lot of fellows come in thinking that they're just gonna write policy and do policy, but the things that you really do is the programmatic stuff, so we do the small P. When you work in the executive branch, you are doing data analytics for your office to someone else is making decisions. So understand that just because if you do the fellowship or you do something that is maybe more in the regulatory space, or you're not actually writing, you may not be actually writing things, you might be informing the people who will be writing. And to understand that all of those things come into play when you do policy. And just because you don't write and are the person making those decisions doesn't mean that you don't contribute to that in any capacity.
I would just echo what you said about not being too narrow. As someone that I don't have a STEM background, and so the AAAS fellowship was not something I was ever looking towards. Like I have my bachelor's in political science and my master's in public policy, but even just being familiar with a broad range of policy issues was really helpful for me. And then also just generally when you're thinking about your career, in grad school and even undergrad, it was always like, okay, here's my timeline. I'm getting to the next goal. I'm getting to the next goal. And then once you graduate, it's kind of just like completely open, especially if you're maybe not applying for the fellowship or after you're done with the fellowship, which felt a little bit weird for me. It was something that I kind of wasn't prepared for because I'd always just been doing these incremental steps, and then it was like just very broad. So that's gonna happen, and that's okay. And if you do have a broad set of experiences, then you'll be able to take advantage of the opportunities as they come up, which you won't know until they come up. But that's, I think, the most important piece, that you can take advantage of whatever kind of comes your way.
I think the only thing I would have to add to all the great things they've had to say is that if you have a chance to learn how to communicate either what your research is or any, like a lot of conferences have workshops on communicating science or communicating research. I don't think I knew until even just like a week ago when I started how important it was to be able to communicate really complicated things down into really simple packages. And you might say like, oh, why is that important? But trust me, like if you do interviews for any of these kinds of positions, once you're in the positions, it's something that like you have to do all the time. Like my boss yesterday or Friday was like, read these 5 peer-reviewed journals and give me like 5 talking points on them. So being able to do that is is something like a big thing that you can work on now that I wish I had known.
Any follow-up questions to that? I was just curious, now that we're exploring our careers, if we do the fellowship and if, especially in hard sciences, I don't know about other sciences, but our work is measured in how many publications we've had. So if you take this break for a year or so to do policy and then say, decide, well, we kind of like that even better. Did you see cases where people could successfully go back?
Yeah, fellows go back all the time. Some of them take sabbatical year to do the fellowship, and they're publishing while they're at the whatever agency. You just have to make sure that you communicate that with your particular agency and not put certain affiliations on your title. But yeah, it's totally okay to go back and take the skill sets that you've learned in the fellowship, especially if you're at a funding agency. One of the valuable things that fellows at NIH or NSF learn is how their merit review or their review process works. And so you're involved in it or in it, and you can help your institution write grants that will be more, you'll be better or be more competitive because you kind of understand how it works, and you can probably you have the ins to be a reviewer afterwards. So yeah, it's definitely it's something that you can definitely do. You just have to communicate it well and make sure all parties involved are clear about what you're doing.
All right. So, what do you love most about your work, and what do you like the least?
We should skip the two.
We're very new.
We just started.
We've been here 2 months. So.
No, you can go first.
I've only been at AU for 6 months, enough time to know what I like and don't like. What I like the most is, I mean, I was always interested in higher ed policy from the beginning. That's what, in science policy, it's part of that, research policy. I coalition side, but also working with the campuses as well. So coalition building both among the higher education groups in DC, but then also on campus, which is what you also need. That's, I mean, when I was a grad student and worked with NAGPS, that's what I liked as well. But you have to build a coalition, whether you're trying to, on your campus, you're trying to get your administrator to do something, or like in the graduate student government, or you're on the Hill and you're trying to get, legislation passed, or you're trying to get funding and appropriations bill.
So I would say I like to think strategically of the big picture issues, and so the programs that I'm involved in at NSF allow me to sit in on meetings with people who make decisions, and you kind of understand how they process. Usually, where I or another person are the ones providing the information that they use to make their decisions. So you kind of get to see how they process it and then make decisions, and you also get to. Most of it is just hearing people and hearing things that they say and they don't say, and understanding how the process works. And I would say that that's one of the best experiences that I have, and it's partially because of the programming that I work with. And even as a AAAS fellow, you are able to go to meetings all over the city and network with as many people as possible. And there is a huge, I wasn't really aware, I was aware about the AAAS Policy Fellows Network, but they're truly everywhere in all layers of government. And so, people will say, oh, I was a fellow in 19 whatever, and, they'd love to talk about it. And so you're kind of in that network, and you could really leverage it to talk to people and interface with them. I would say, I guess, maybe the things I don't like as much. Sometimes you can get irritated with the bureaucracy of things, of like, maybe we should have thought about this before, but you have to understand the context of the agencies that agencies are in. They are given money and they're responsible for making sure that money that they give out is appropriately used, because they're at the behest of the taxpayers and Congress. And so they have to make some tough decisions about where funding goes. And all things kind of come into play. So it can get a little frustrating, but that's kind of the nature of the game. And things move really slowly. Everything is slow.
My job's a little bit different from the other panelists, but my favorite part about my work is it's incredibly intellectually stimulating. So what I do at the think tank where I work is we sort of think about the societal and policy level impacts of emergent technologies now and in the future for the military. So our job is to help make sure that the armed services have the latest and greatest, sexiest, most sophisticated technology to help the warfighter and complete his mission, and also to help military leaders use science and technology so they can make the best strategic decisions, in like a battlefield context. So part of our training, we actually had to read science fiction novels and then debate them together as a class in order to help us think about, imagine there's some new technology capability that exists, see how the society or how different agents in this community were using it to wage misinformation campaigns, or using it to wage conflict among one another. So that's really cool. So some examples of the things I get to think about are, for example, NASA wants to send men into deep space, missions to Mars, or long-term habitats on the moon. And so they commissioned a literature review on what do we know about the impacts of space flight on the human brain. So as a neuroscientist, I was like, this is dope. I get to think about microgravity and radiation or long-term social deprivation and how that messes you up. And then what NASA can do to try to mitigate some of those health effects, what research is missing, where are the gaps. Then they wanted to know, okay, pretend now it's 2040. Where will science and technology capabilities have advanced by then? And like what cool experiments would we be planning to do at that point in time that we can't do now because we're too, we just don't have the materials yet. Super cool. Another example was trying to think, like synthetic biology is really blowing up. People don't really know where it's going to be in the next decade or two. thinking a lot about CRISPR-Cas9 technology, so genetic engineering, the bioethical implications of that. How much should you be able to modify your own body? How much should you be able to modify the genes of an unborn, in zygotes, unborn children? So it's just really, really neat that I get to think about how technology now, or technology that might be coming about, will have just really dramatic paradigm-shifting impacts on our community, and then what role should government play, if any, in safeguarding that, for public health, issues, for national security issues, for, defense and military needs, et cetera. And then it's interesting, my portfolio that I do now is in microelectronics. I did not know what a semiconductor or a diode or anything was before I came in. I'm a biologist by training. But now I get to think about things like cybersecurity and data and privacy issues and cyber warfare, information warfare. Cycling back to things I wish I had known as a grad student, I thought, oh, if I'm a neuroscientist or biologist, I can only do neuroscience and biology. Outside of academia, they look at your PhD and they're like, oh, you're STEM. They're kind of agnostic to what the specialty is, isn't that?
Yeah.
It's just science. Then also, being a PhD means that within, 3 months, I guess for myself, you will have absorbed all of the industry-specific knowledge that you need to make the strategic level 30,000-foot view policy recommendations that are necessary to do your job. You don't need to be like deep down in the weeds and like worrying about P less 1.5, doesn't matter. You just need to sort of understand at a very high level implications of the technology and sort of broad strokes sufficiently, and then be able to communicate that at like a 12th grade reading level to a politician who has maybe a high school remembering of science and technology, and then be able to make a data-driven sort of recommendation. So I really love that aspect of my job. What I hate is having to wear business formal. I hate that in my lab I had like 12-hour-long experiments. I could come in my pajamas, take a nap midday, and come back. I was like eating bonbons at my desk. Can't even hear. It's a very like black tie sort of place. So I'm not too cool with the stiffness of it all and the bureaucracy. I do miss some of the independence of being able to design my own experiments and control my own schedule. My boss controls my schedule. So it's just like being a white collar, like mid-level worker is, something to get used to. But the 9 to 5 is great. When I go home, I am home and I have a personal life. That's music. That is rock climbing. That's really fun. So,
Yeah, so very jealous right now.
Yeah.
That is one thing I would say I really love is you do get bombarded with emails and it's crazy, but you hit Saturday and it's done. You're like, how am I not receiving 40 emails on Saturday, 40 minutes? I mean, they just stop. They go. I'm not saying it's true everywhere.
I mean, yeah, it is. It's true. People stop emailing you on the weekends, but that doesn't mean that there aren't fires. And so, like NSF and NIH to a certain extent, there aren't literal fires burning around the globe that they're responsible for. So, like, yeah, they're funding agencies. So, yeah, we work 9 to 5 and telework on Fridays, and then maybe a place like State Department where there's fires all the time. Their lifestyles are much different. So it does get we work to act like that. 9 to 5. And teleworking is a big thing, at least in the government.
Any thoughts in response to that?
Wait, you said that you're, sorry, let me just start over. Did you have any say in what subdivision you were advising on in the think tank that you work in, or was it just kind of like you have a PhD? Because you said they just love your PhD and they just put you anywhere, or could they have said like you do have a microbiology background, CRISPR might be a good fit?
Sure. No. So my institution has a portfolio that has particular bias. It's microelectronics, space, aerospace engineering, whatever, synthetic biology. And for me specifically, I could have totally done the bio-based projects, but I chose not to because I wanted to diversify my experience. But they would not have put someone on a project that they would have hated because it'd just be terrible for morale. You wouldn't do a good job anyway. And so they tend to put people where they want to go, and they try not to have you feel pigeonholed and say, oh, the bio person has to do bio, or engineering has to do engineering. They kind of encourage crosstalk. Also, having a bio background but using it in some other field of microelectronics, it's cool to find cross-pollination of ideas, bringing principles, from my field of seeing how they might apply to other industries. It sort of helps you think creatively and ideate in a less conventional way than if you were in your same academic setting.
All right, so another question. Some students express concern that a career policy requires a great degree of public scrutiny. Could you speak to that?
It depends on the level of government that you're at. Like there's the GS scale that goes up to 15, and then beyond that is this is executive service where like congressional members and the director of the agencies kind of lie, and they have special rules about having Twitter accounts and public facing things. But I think just in general, in this day and age, you have to be mindful about the things that you put out there, because someone, whether you're going into policy or an industry job, they are looking at your Facebook and your LinkedIn profile and your social media persona and judging you for it. And they may not say that outright, but they probably are. And so you have to be mindful. That doesn't say that you can't express, you are free to express your views. So as policy fellows working in the government, we're able to go and protest if we want to. We just can't say, like, we can't wear an NSF shirt and say, I'm from NSF and I support whatever this cause is. And also in the same vein, because of the Hatch Act, we can't advocate for funding for our particular agency. So we can't go to people and say, you should call your senator to give us more funding. We can't say that in any capacity whatsoever. So there are some limitations in that professional space, but honestly, it's more about being mindful about how you're perceived, and words matter, and in this day and age, people will take one tweet and can try to really show that you're this person that you're not. And so it's just about being mindful about it.
Yeah, having not worked for the government, but more working with outside groups and in the advocacy space, I think I often looked at people kind of in the higher education space, like what are the other lobbyists doing, like what are their Twitter accounts look like? It seems to me that if you have a few political tweets, but it's not every tweet, then that's like kind of okay. If someone's gonna look at your Twitter and it's like, oh, they're tweeting about other things, and they may have a couple, maybe not like a cuss word about the president, maybe you would never tweet that, but it seems, if they're peppered in, it seems like that was kind of like an acceptable thing. So that is one thing I did to look. I also have a personal private Twitter account for those other things, but I definitely think you have to think about it, especially in advocacy. You have to work with members of both sides of the aisle. So if they can easily look at your Twitter account and see that you've been tweeting things negative about the party or about the president, that kind of already hurts your case going into it.
I have a public Twitter account, and there is some political stuff on it, but I honestly use it mostly for science policy issues, because I knew I would be applying for science policy fellowships. And so I very much, curate what I put out there, I suppose you could say, so that if they do go looking for me, they're gonna say, oh wow, she's really engaged on the science policy front, right? So you can use it to your advantage potentially as well. Now that I'm in Congress, so I'm actually not prohibited by the Hatch Act, because I'm in like this weird in-between space. And a lot of congressional staffers have Twitter accounts and are incredibly partisan on them. I mean, it's kind of shocking, but for them it depends on the boss, who's the member of Congress, who's the senator or the congressperson. Some of them don't want any of their employees ever tweeting, ever. Like, you have to delete them. And some of them are like, that's great, yeah, put it out there, go for it. So it's really know where you are in terms of who you're working for and what your policies are. And like for you all now, just be careful. I mean, that's the best thing.
But Twitter is a good way to show your science policy knowledge and to identify yourself as someone who's interested in science policy and maybe in a specific space, like maybe water quality, and you're retweeting hopefully good science or good articles on science policy related to that topic, just to show that you're a knowledge leader because your knowledge is power. And so there is a flip side of that to having a public facing account is to show your dedication in a certain space.
I have a fun story about Twitter. So I would say use your Twitter and LinkedIn to build your brand publicly, to build your professional brand. So some people choose to keep it pretty not partisan or keep it minimally political. My Twitter is very political, but I'm very, very mindful about it. And so I don't post anything publicly that I would not be comfortable defending if it was like on a Times Square marquee. And this happened to me where I went into a job interview and the boss said to me, your Twitter account said last week about whatever it was, the election, something, X, Y, Z about this candidate. Like, why did you say that? And it shocked me that he would like ask me directly, but I was like, I said this because X, Y, or Z. So I wouldn't tweet anything that I wouldn't be comfortable being potentially confronted about if it were someone whose opinion I held in high regard. And also, policy doesn't, what was the quote someone told me? They said, a science policy, or being nonpartisan, this doesn't necessarily mean it's not political. It's hard to be not political. And so I do take stances on certain things. I do feel strongly about particular issues, and I always try to couch it from this is data-driven, this isn't my evidence-based approach. The science says this, here's a citation. As a neurobiologist, I support data-driven or evidence-based addiction recovery programs, like whatever, And so as you're building your public persona and sort of your identity as a science policy professional, think about what hills you're willing to die on, and then be that persona, and think about things that you're less comfortable talking about publicly and that can go on your private. But you don't have to be Switzerland if you don't want to be. It's okay to take a stand, but just be comfortable defending it.
Any questions, follow-up questions? I have a general question. What is a typical age of a fellow, for example? Do people just go there right after grad school or mid-career? And
It's all over the place.
I'm 29, I went straight out of grad school.
Okay. And what would be the suggestion of, like, when would you enter this kind of career path? And then what happens afterwards typically, and how secure is the job market?
I think there's a comment before about, we said it about after your academics kind of made tracks and have say, if you do X, Y, Z, you'll get this. After that and outside of that space, it's nebulous. So we can't say, well, if you do this, you're going to get this job, because that office might not have funding or whatever. And so it's hard to, and that you just have to be comfortable with that. You're always taking a risk. People move all the way across here and they may not, their office might have been dissolved. So like it's a risk that you have to take. And I'd say it's all over in terms of the age or the career levels, and that's what AAAS likes. They highlight